Do we need God to make sense of life? Your 1 minute answer begins now, Sue.
Absolutely not. That will do for an answer.
Okay. Do we need God to make sense of life, Jordan?
Well, God is what you use to make sense of your life, by definition. This is one of the things I learned from Jung. The highest value, you have a hierarchy of values. You have to. Otherwise, you can't act or you're painfully confused. You have a hierarchy of values. Whatever is at the top of that hierarchy of values serves the function of God for you. Now, it may be a God that you don't believe in or a God that you can't name, but it doesn't matter because it's God for you. And what you think about God has very little impact on how God is acting within you.
In this video, Jordan Peterson and Susan Blackmore confront beliefs on finding meaning in life and the role of God. Dr. Peterson argues for values as a means to make sense of life, while Susan Blackmore brings her perspective as an atheist. This thought-provoking discussion sheds light on the question of purpose and meaning, with a focus on religious and non-religious perspectives. Gain unique insight on this important topic.
Do you think you can just have gratitude in general, or must gratitude always be given towards something and ultimately
Well,
God?
that's a good question. That goes back to our discussion about acting things out. Like, gratitude is something you feel towards something. And you can say, well, I don't feel it towards anything in particular. And I would say, all right, well, the diffuse nothing that you feel it towards serves in your psychological hierarchy as your equivalent of God.
No, but it's gratitude. This morning, for example, I looked out and it was so green. We've had frosts and it's been white the last few days, and it was green this morning, and it was just gratitude to the universe, if you like. It's not really God because it's not the creator. It's not anything I can pray to. I know.
Why feel gratitude towards it?
I don't know, but I find
That's
it.
fine.
I know that you tackle in this book that happiness is not an ultimate good, and I struggle
it's
this
just
way.
not an ultimate goal.
Oh, okay,
I didn't say it wasn't an ultimate
all
good.
All right, okay.
There's a big difference between those things.
You're right. You picked me up correctly on that. Nevertheless, we are happiness-seeking creatures, and I have found through practice and growing older that acting gratitude, thinking gratitude, feeling gratitude makes me happier and seems to rub off on other people.
So I don't think we are happiness-seeking creatures, and I think it's a low goal. Not because there's something wrong with being happy, because, thank God if you get to be happy now and then. But I don't think that that's what we seek. I think we seek a meaning that's deep enough to sustain us through tragedy. And that is way different.
Do you know, when I hit tragedy is too strong a word, I think. But when horrible things happen to me, or I feel, or I read some terrible thing going on in the world, yes, those are tragedies going on in the world, my response is, nothing matters. It's all empty and meaningless. This is how the world is. Get used to it. Get on with it, girl.
That sounds like a very Zen Buddhist way of dealing.
I guess it is.
Meaning.
Well, it's a paradoxical way, though.
It is kind of paradoxical.
The first part of that is nihilistic, and the second part isn't. So how do you reconcile those two things? Why get on with it, girl?
Because, well, here's another thing. I've often done this with my students. Let's suppose you become nihilistic. Nothing matters. There's no point in doing that. I think we live in a pointless universe. What are you going to do? And I say to them, like William James in his wonderful thing about getting up in the morning, but that's a slightly different point that he makes there. But I say to them, okay, tomorrow morning, when you wake up, think it's all pointless. There's no point in doing anything. Now, what are you going to do? Well, actually, you're going to need to go to the loo. You're going to get out of bed and you're going to go to the bathroom. And when you're there, you'll think, actually, I'm hungry. I think I want to go down to the kitchen. I probably should put my slippers on. Why don't I get dressed? You go and have something to eat. And then you think, I'm bored. And you go to university and go into your lectures. And, we are not creatures who will just not do anything. To me, to go through that process, which I've done in the past a lot, and it's just natural now, is a very positive way of living. To accept the meaningless and ultimate emptiness of everything, and accept that this creature here, this thing, this evolved creature just will get on with life.
But you're not accepting the meaninglessness of it, even by going through those actions that you described.
You don't think so?
Not at all, because you're acting as if those things are meaningful.
Yes, I am. I'm
right.
acting as though those things
are you pretending that they're meaningful?
Pardon?
Are you pretending that they're meaningful?
No, I'm not pretending. my way of putting it would be that those meanings are constructed by myself and others.
They're personal
and they're
meanings rather than-
because of the kind of creatures we are, because of the meme
But they're not
plexes,
constructed.
I'd like to hear
Hunger
Jordan's
isn't
response to
constructed. Neither is your desire to use the loo. None of that's
No,
constructed.
no, but the fact that there is a loo is part
Yes.
of culture.
Yeah, well, thank
And the
God
fact
for that.
Yeah.
But see,
oh, you thank God, would you,
see-
for that? Sorry, that's a poor joke.
Well, you see, so imagine this. You have the proximal meanings that you described that are sort of a priori, right? They're handed to you. You might consider them as needs or drives, although they're
Yes.
not. They're personalities. That's not the right way of conceptualizing them. But then there's the intermingling of all those needs and drives, let's say, and that constitutes a new layer of structure, because it isn't just that you have to eat and that you have to use the washroom and that you have to have something to drink and that you have to be warm enough or cool enough to survive. It's that you have to do all those things at the same time in a situation where you're going to have to propagate that across time, and you're going to have to do it with a bunch of other people, and it's always been like that. And so what that means is that out of those proximal meanings, higher meanings arise. And you might say, well, those meanings are arbitrary, and I would think those are religious
I wouldn't
meanings.
say they are arbitrary, but I would say they were constructed. It's very interesting. Reading your
What
book...
do you mean by constructed?
Well, they are a consequence of mimetic evolution, of the language that people are brought up in, the culture they live in, the arguments they have. I mean,
What about the biology that they're given?
well, we start with the biology, and the memes build on top of that.
Nah,
Culture
the
builds
memes are
on
biology too.
Well, by definition, they are. Well,
See, this is the thing.
I would follow Dawkins in saying, well, talk about genes as biology, talk about memes as culture. That's all I meant by dividing that. But let me say this.
Yeah, but I don't accept that division.
But
don't
I
think
want to
that's
get back
an
to what we're saying
acceptable
about
division.
meaning. Reading your book made me think a lot about what you mean by meaning, and your claim that we should have a meaningful life or strive for a meaningful life, that meaningfulness is important. And I kept asking myself, do I live that way? What meanings does my life have? And, if I think of something like, well, that most of my striving goes into writing my books. And is that meaningful? And again, I have the same response when I ask myself that question. It's just what this body does.
Then you should listen to the body and stop listening to the thing that's criticizing it.
And what would the body say?
It would say, write your book and try to be as clear as you possibly can
that's
about
what I
it.
do. And that's
Right, but this is
exactly what I do.
What I said at the beginning is that the atheist types act out a religious structure and
No,
criticize
there's
it.
no religious structure.
Let
We
me
come
get-
to this
let me
big
get-
question
Let me get to
now.
this question, because
Yes,
I
we
did
have.
want to get to this, because
Right.
you have a fascinating part in your book, Jordan, where you do say this. You're simply not addressing atheists. You say you're simply not an atheist in your actions, and it is your actions.
Or
that
if you
most
are, look out.
And it is your actions that most accurately reflect your religious beliefs. What do you mean by that? What are you saying, that no one is really an atheist deep down?
I didn't say no one was.
Okay.
I said that most of the people who claim to be atheists aren't. So this is why I like Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Because Raskolnikov tried to act like an atheist, right? He took the ideas that were floating around, Dostoevsky took the ideas that were floating around in the late 1800s, which are still the ideas that we're discussing today. One most fundamental idea, I suppose, being after Nietzsche's announcement of the death of God, that if there is no God, then anything is permitted. That was Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov's the criminal in Crime and Punishment, the murderer. He gets away with his murder, technically, but not psychologically. And he decides that if there's no God, anything is permitted.
But
And
this
he can't
doesn't
see a
have to be
reason.
true. That's a person in a character in a novel. I don't think that's so.
Well, let's hear the end of that story. And what do you take away from what Dostoevsky has to say about?
Well, Dostoevsky's takeaway was that there was a moral law that Raskolnikov was breaking, even though he rationalized his way through it. Like, he committed the perfect murder, right? He murdered a woman who people would have voted to murder, and then he got away with it. And he did it for good reasons, at least reasons that he could rationalize as good. And then he got away with it, but it destroyed his soul. And Dostoevsky's right about that. And one of the things I like about Dostoevsky as compared to Nietzsche, say, because I think Dostoevsky is the profounder of the two, is that in The Brothers Karamazov, for example, Ivan is the atheist, and Ivan is everything you'd want a man to be, like, seriously. And Dostoevsky, man, he doesn't straw man his opponents. The most powerful characters in his books are always the opponents of what he himself believes. And Ivan is always arguing with Alyosha, who's his younger brother, who's a monastic novitiate and really can't articulate himself very well, has nowhere near the force or charisma of Ivan. But Alyosha wins the drama, even though he loses all the arguments. And that's where Dostoevsky is so great. It's like, And this is what you're doing in your life. You're acting out the logos,
All right.
Susan. That's what you're doing. You're writing books to illuminate the world.
Yes.
You say,
And
well, I
that's
don't
not
believe
coming
in
from
that.
a place
Yes, you
of
do.
meaninglessness.
Don't you think it's kind of offensive to say to me that I'm not an atheist when I am? Why don't answer me this question? Why do you think I don't go around murdering people? Why do you think I go around trying to be?
I don't know you well enough to know.
Yes, I could have done something.
I think often the reason that people don't do it is because they're too cowardly.
Oh, that could be a reason. It could be that I don't murder people. I'd really
No, I'm
love
not
to.
necessarily saying you.
No, it's
well,
a possible one.
It's
All
in
right,
fact
all right.
highly likely at
Yes.
some times in your life
But
if you're a
it's
normal
very-
person.
We're needing to close things out, and
Dear, the end
I
already?
know it's we've had not long enough, but Jordan, just come back to this because I want to hear why ultimately, despite everything that Sue said there, you still think she's behaving as though there is, in some sense, a God or some ultimate meaning, even though she protests that no, that's.
Well, I would say she's acting it out. Well, for example, the act of writing a book. I mean, the Judeo-Christian culture is the culture of the book. It's the revelation of the proper mode of being in written form. It's not only that, but it's a large part of that. It's the culture of the book. You're acting out the culture of the book. It's thousands of years old, and the true voice in the culture of the book is the logos. That's what it is, technically speaking. And so she's acting out the logos and writing a book. It's like, and then she says, "Well, I don't believe in God." It's like, okay, that's
The
fine.
logos, of
acting
course,
like you do is fine.
in
That will
Scripture, in the New Testament, is
The word.
brought into the Word, and it of course
do. The
relates
word
to
that brings order out
and
of chaos.
to Jesus Christ as
Yes.
the sort of personification almost of that.
Right. He's the archetypal manifestation of the logos.
I mean, these are all big words and things. I mean, a lot of people will be asking, what do you actually make of, in Christian terms, the figure of Jesus? Do you believe that he was in some sense divine? Was there, when you look at what the Bible tells us about Jesus?
Well, one thing you might ask yourself is, do you believe that each individual is divine in some sense? And I would say, well, perhaps not, but you act as though you do. And our law acts as if it does. It's predicated on that idea, because the sovereignty of the individual is the divinity of the individual. There's no difference between those two things. And I can make an absolutely brutally clear case for the development of that idea historically. I've traced it back to Mesopotamia, at least in its earliest written forms. I mean, originally the only real sovereign individuals were the sovereigns, right? The emperors and pharaohs. But the idea of the sovereign individual descended down the hierarchy of power, so to speak, until with Christianity it was universalized. We're each sovereign individuals, and that means that the law itself is written as if we each contain a spark of divinity. And so then I think, well, what is that divinity? And in the Christian worldview, well, that's the logos. That's the true speech that brings forth habitable and good order from the chaos of potential.
And in your view, whether she likes it or not, Sue is at some level a benefactor of that reality of what
Not
undergirds
a
her.
contributor, not only a much better than merely being a benefactor, an active contributor. It's no easy thing to write a book and to get your thoughts straight and to put them forward into the world.
But she
One
couldn't do it
consequence-
without this idea, in a sense, of God.
She doesn't need the idea, even it's embodied. She's
Okay.
acting it out.
One of the consequences of the way I've been thinking about it, and Sam Harris talks about this too, is the way I think about it prevents me going, ooh, I'm so clever, I've written a brilliant book. I mean, it doesn't always. I have those thoughts come up, but I've got quite good at seeing them coming up and going, oh, there comes that thought again, because I'm taking the view that these books are, the memes are doing it through this organism here. And I have
That
fun.
would be the eternal logos manifesting itself.
All right,
within
if you want to
no,
put
but
it in
no,
those
but
terms.
I'm not playing games. Like, that's the oldest language we have for that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the logos that I'm talking about is the integration of those motivational forces that you were describing. It's not merely a meme. Like, that's where Dawkins is wrong about that. There isn't biology and memes. The interactions matter. They're crucial. Some of these memes are millions of years old.
But you've
And
slipped
plenty-
away, if I can bring you back to Justin's question, really, because you slithered out of it, I think, in your question was Jesus different from the rest of us? By saying, oh, we've all got a spark of divinity. But do you then believe that Jesus was somehow divine in a sense that other than what I am? What was that, did he do miracles? Was he, all of that stuff that
Quick
makes
answer,
him...
and then we'll finish with a final question.
Quick answer. How about this? Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. That's a miracle. That's the separation of church and state in one sentence. So there's a miracle for you.
We're going to go for a final question. I'm going to ask it for both of you, which was the question we began with. We're talking about the psychology of belief. Do we need God to make sense of life? Your 1 minute answer begins now, Sue.
Absolutely not. That will do for an answer.
Okay. Do we need God to make sense of life, Jordan?
Well, God is what you use to make sense of your life, by definition. This is one of the things I learned from Jung. The highest value, you have a hierarchy of values. You have to. Otherwise, you can't act, or you're painfully confused. You have a hierarchy of values. Whatever is at the top of that hierarchy of values serves the function of God for you. Now, it may be a God that you don't believe in, or a God that you can't name, but it doesn't matter, because it's God for you. And what you think about God has very little impact on how God is acting within you, whatever God it is that you happen to be, let's say, following.
Thank you for watching this amazing discussion on God and finding meaning in life. If you found this video insightful, please don't forget to like, hit the bell to subscribe, and leave your comments below. Join us again for more interesting videos that will help us evolve together.